Okay, so GCP principles of GCP. Principles of GCP. So first point to be noted is there are 13 principles. 13 principles. Any of this principle is not being followed, any of this principle is not being maintained, then we call it as GCP finding, which is the biggest finding, and all clinical trials should follow this 13 principles. These are the backbone for us when we are conducting clinical trials or any clinical trial related activities, either it is CDM or PV or medical writing, whatever activities we are performing. So our focus is to follow this 13 principles, which is being specified in ICH E6R2. So the reference document for this is ICH E6R2, which is revision 2 document, and International Council for Harmonization. Efficacy regulations or guidelines, 6th section. So now I'll continue with one by one principles so that we can have how the principles are being used. So principle number one. So we need to remember 3 words. One is Declaration of Helsinki, one is GCP, one is applicable regulations. Applicable regulations. So now what is applicable regulations is, if you are submitting an application in India, then you need to follow a DCGI regulations or CT regulations, which are being given by our CDSE or DCGI. And DOH stands for Declaration of Helsinki, which is one of the most important guidelines specifically used for physicians. And GCP, as usual, you know, good clinical practice, which is ICH E6R2. So now, how do we tell this principle number one during our, how do we explain this? What is principle number one? So now all clinical trials should be conducted in accordance with Declaration of Helsinki, GCP, and applicable regulations. So any of this is being deviated, then principle number one is your biggest problem. So I'll repeat this principle. Clinical trials should be conducted in accordance with Declaration of Helsinki, GCP, applicable regulations. So this is principle number one. You need to remember only 3 words: Declaration of Helsinki, GCP, applicable regulations. So this is the first principle which we are going to have it for principles of GCP. Coming back to principle number 2. So you need to remember 2 words. One is risk and one is benefit. One is risk and one is benefit. So now to initiate a clinical trial or to continue a clinical trial, either you have to initiate a clinical trial or you need to continue a clinical trial. So now you always have to check the risk is less than the benefit. Risk is less than the benefit. If risk is more than the benefit, then a clinical trial should not be initiated or it should not be continued. At any point in time, risk should be always less than the benefit. So principle number 2 speaks about to initiate a clinical trial, always the benefit should outweigh the risk. So before a clinical trial is initiated, a foreseeable risk and inconvenience should be weighed against anticipated benefit, either it is for an individual person or to the society. A trial should be initiated only when the anticipated benefits justify the risk. So benefit should be more than risk, then only either it should be initiated or it should be continued. So this is principle number 2. Coming back to principle number 3. So there are 2 words here in principle number 3. So first word is RSW. The second word is science and society. Science and society. Science and society. So now RSW stands for rights, safety, well-being of trial subjects. Now this rights, safety, and well-being of trial subjects are most important considerations. Most important considerations when it is compared with your science and society. So now you want to do a research, answer is yes, you can do, but not at the cost of the right, safety, and well-being of trial subjects. You wanted to become famous, not at the cost of putting the health or rights, safety, and well-being of trial subjects at your problematic or at the concerned aspects. So now principle number 3 speaks like this: the right, safety, and well-being of trial subjects are most important considerations and should always prevail over science and society. Now, if you have a running race between rights, safety, and well-being and science and society, always this rights, safety, and well-being of trial subjects are most important considerations. It should never ever be less than your science and society. So this is one more thing which we have to understand at the principle number 3. Now, coming back to principle number 4, you need to understand 2 words here. One is non-clinical data, and as well as clinical data, So non-clinical data and clinical data. So now always remember, what is non-clinical data? Non-clinical data is animal studies, or which does not include human beings. Clinical studies are which includes human beings. Now, non-clinical and clinical data should be adequate. You should have adequate information, adequate justification for aspect of conducting a clinical trial. Say, for example, I'm giving a vague example here. Now you have conducted a drug. A drug is having an efficacy of diabetes. And now you need to test on diabetes itself because it's showing efficacy on diabetes in animals and human beings. Now you can't propose a clinical trial saying that my drug, I want to test it for cancer. So because the previous available non-clinical and clinical information justifies or supports for diabetes. So whenever you are designing a clinical trial, you need to have enough evidence of previous non-clinical and clinical information which supports the proposed clinical trial. Now, if you want to design a clinical trial, you need to have enough non-clinical and clinical evidence which supports you can conduct this clinical trial because you already have enough data of non-clinical and clinical data. So now the 4th principle looks like this: the available clinical and non-clinical information on the investigational medicinal product, on the IMP, on the investigational medicinal product should be adequate. You should have enough data to support a proposed clinical trial. You can't go and say that, okay, I will do whatever I want without seeing the previous clinical and non-clinical data. So now this is what you call it as available non-clinical and clinical data, which supports the investigational medicinal product clinical trial. So this is about the 4th principle. Coming back to the 5th principle, most important principle, the word called as protocol. So now you need to understand the 5th principle speaks about protocol. So now protocol or clinical trial should be designed. So it will be clearly aspect given is clinical trial should be designed in such a way it is scientifically sound. So you need to have science in it. You can't go and say that, okay, I'll do this XYZ. It should be scientifically sound and it should be clearly described. In one document. That document is called as protocol. So now clinical trial should be designed. In a scientifically sound manner, which is clearly described in one document. That document is your protocol. Now coming back to protocol is a document which contains your objective, design, methodologies, statistical considerations, and organization of clinical trial. So this is your 5th principle, very important principle, which is your protocol. Now coming back to 6th principle, we speak about IRB and IEC. Now coming back to speaking about IRB, IEC, it's an independent body which reviews and approves your clinical trial documents, such as protocol or ICF or CVs or IVs and all those things. Now a trial should be conducted. In compliance with A trial should be conducted in compliance with, in adherence with protocol. So protocol, but the protocol should have received prior approval, prior from IRB and IEC. So trial should be conducted in compliance with protocol, which has priorly reviewed and approved by IRB and IEC. If the protocol is not been approved by IRB, IEC, you can't conduct a clinical trial or you can't initiate a clinical trial. So any of these points is not been met, then you can't conduct a clinical trial. Unless and until the IRB and IEC is approved, you cannot continue the clinical trial for any kind of purpose. That's why I have put a point which is called as IRB and IEC. Now 2.7, sorry, seventh principle. So the seventh principle speaks about physicians or investigators. Physicians and investigators. So now the medical care and medical decisions. So two words, medical care and medical decisions. Medical care and medical decisions is a prime responsibility of a qualified, trained and experienced physician who is also called as investigator. So it means that a medical care given or medical decisions taken on behalf of subject should be always a responsibility of a qualified physician. A qualified physician, or it can be sometimes dentist when the clinical trial is dental clinical trial. So this is principle number 7. The medical care and medical decisions taken on behalf of subject is a primary responsibility of a physician or a dentist appropriately when a clinical trial is dental clinical trial. Now coming back to 8th principle. So here qualification, training and experience. These 3 words you need to remember in 2.8. So, or in other words, this each and every individual who is participating in clinical trial or who is working in clinical trial, trials should be appropriately qualified, trained and experienced to perform his or her activities. So now anyone who wants to work in clinical trials should be appropriately qualified with qualification, trained with respect to certification of training, and then experience to perform his activities or her activities. So now principle looks like this. Each individual involved in conduct of clinical trial should be qualified by education, training and experience to perform his or her respective tasks. So now 9th one speaks about ICF. Now ICF should be taken freely, so freely without any pressure. And the next one, from each subject before participation of clinical trial. Before the clinical trial participation, the ICF should be signed personally by the subject. Now it looks like this. Freely given informed consent should be obtained from each and every subject prior to the participation of clinical trial. So now freely given informed consent from each subject should be obtained before the participation of clinical trial. So this is the most important point, which is your informed consent form. Freely given informed consent from each subject should be obtained before participation of clinical trial. There should never be a force, and there you cannot go and say that, okay, I will not take an informed consent from the subject, or you can't go and say that, okay, you first participate in clinical trial, later on I'll give you informed consent form. It should be the first document to be signed by the subject. So the next principle speaks about clinical trial data or clinical trial information, or clinical trial data. So information or data. So now clinical trial data, you should understand clinical trial data should be in a way that it should be recorded and handled. Okay, it should be recorded and handled in such a way that allows accurate reporting, and interpretation and verification. So it means that the clinical trial data should never ever be falsified. It should be accurately given. It should be accurately reported. So clinical trial information or data should be recorded and handled and stored in such a way that allows the accurate reporting, interpretation, and verification of clinical trial data. You could have gone back and verified it, interpreted it, and accurate reporting should be done. So which is also called as the clinical trial information to be recorded, handled, and as well as stored. So this is about principle number 10. Now coming back to principle number 11. So principle number 11, you need to remember confidentiality. So the confidentiality of subject is most important priority which is being given in accordance to applicable regulatory requirement. So making sure the respecting of the privacy information of the subject. So it looks like this: confidentiality of records. So the confidentiality of records, which identifies the subject identity, either it is name of the subject or mail ID or phone number of the subject, should be protected, should be always protected in order to respect or in order to make sure that we are respecting the privacy and confidentiality of the subjects as per the applicable regulatory requirement. So in other words, this principle speaks about the confidentiality of records that could identify the subjects. Example of NA records should be protected, respecting the privacy and confidentiality of the subject. So this is what is your 11th principle. Now coming back to 12th principle. So principle number 12. So IMP. So you need to remember IMP, and both words you remember. One is GMP, one is protocol. So investigational medicinal product should be manufactured as per GMP, should be used as per your protocol. Investigational medicinal product should be manufactured as per GMP, manufactured as per GMP, and used as per a protocol, which is approved protocol, So this is your 12th principle. So investigational medicinal product should be manufactured as per GMP, good manufacturing practice, and should be used as per your protocol. So this is your principle number 12. Coming back to principle number 13, which is the last principle of your GCP, which says about quality of process. So now for any process, for every process, we need to include something which is called as quality process, which can give us quality at every aspect. We should implement it. So now systems that allows accurate quality, or systems that assures quality should be implemented at every step, every step. So now this is what you call it as quality processes should be implemented at every level of the processes. So now I'll repeat it, all the 13 principles in one shot. So yeah. So first principle, clinical trial should be conducted in accordance with Declaration of Helsinki, GCP, applicable regulatory requirements. Before a trial is initiated or continued, always the benefit should outweigh the risk. Then we can initiate or continue the clinical trials. The right, safety, and well-being of trial subjects are most important considerations and always prevail over science and society. The available non-clinical and clinical information or data should support the proposed clinical trial. The clinical trial should be designed in scientifically sound and clearly described in a protocol. A trial should be conducted in compliance with protocol, which has priorly reviewed and approved by IRB and IEC. The medical care and medical decision of the subjects are taken behalf of the subjects is a primary responsibility of a physician or a dentist appropriately. Each individual who is working in clinical trial should be qualified, trained, and experienced to perform his or her activities. The freely given informed consent should be obtained from each subject before the participation of clinical trials from the subjects. The clinical trial data should be recorded, handled, and stored such a way that the accurate reporting, interpretation, and verification can be done at any point in time. The confidentiality which assess the records which can be protected, which is as per your applicable regulatory requirements. The investigational medicinal product should be manufactured as per GMP, used as per protocol. The quality of the clinical trial should implement all the systems that allows or assures the quality at every level should be implemented at each and every step. So these are the 13 principles of GCP.